Thomas Blackwood, a 35-year-old philosophy professor specializing in pessimism and Schopenhauer's works, sits alone in his cluttered apartment, surrounded by dusty books and empty coffee cups. The weak autumn light filters through half-drawn blinds, illuminating his unshaven face as he obsessively rereads Schopenhauer's essays on women for the third time that week. The fundamental defect of the female character is a lack of a sense of justice, he mumbles, finding bitter comfort in the philosopher's words. His fingers trace the underlined passages that have become his mantra since his divorce 6 months ago. But earlier that day, during a faculty meeting at Westridge University, Dr. Elena Mercer, newly hired with a reputation for brilliant work on feminist interpretations of 19th century philosophy, had challenged his interpretation of Schopenhauer. Perhaps we might consider the historical context of his views rather than presenting them as timeless wisdom, she had suggested, her voice calm but her eyes direct. Thomas had dismissed her with thinly veiled contempt. Some truths transcend their historical moment, Dr. Mercer, he'd replied coldly. That evening, standing before the cracked bathroom mirror, broken during a fit of rage the night Claire had left, he hardly recognizes the angry man looking back at him. The reflection shows sunken eyes and a bitter downward curve to his mouth that wasn't there 3 years ago. "What happened to you?" he whispers to himself, the question hanging in the silent apartment. Thomas's childhood unfolds in fragments of memory, a house in suburban Boston filled with tense silences. His father, William Blackwood, a stern mathematics professor who demanded perfection and offered little affection, abandoned the family when Thomas was 11, leaving only a brief note claiming he needed to live authentically. His mother, Margaret, struggled with depression afterward, retreating into herself and leaving young Thomas to essentially raise himself. In one pivotal memory, 13-year-old Thomas finds his mother staring blankly at the wall, whispering, "Men will always leave. It's their nature." The words embedded themselves in his developing psyche. During his undergraduate years at Princeton, Thomas's relationships followed a pattern: initial passionate connection followed by increasing emotional distance. Sarah, his college girlfriend, eventually ended things during their senior year. "You're never really here, Thomas," she said. "You're always observing life instead of living it." In graduate school, he discovered Schopenhauer and found validation in the philosopher's pessimistic worldview. His doctoral thesis on Schopenhauer's concept of the will garnered acclaim, launching his academic career. Claire entered his life when he was 28, brilliant, warm, and determined to break through his defenses. For a while it seemed she might succeed, but after 7 years of marriage, she packed her bags. "I can't compete with your philosophies anymore," Claire said on that final night. "You've constructed this perfect intellectual fortress where nothing can touch you, not pain, not joy, and certainly not me." Now alone in his apartment, Thomas pours another whiskey and returns to his books, using Schopenhauer's ideas not as academic pursuit, but as emotional armor against his vulnerability. The department chair, Professor Richard Walsh, calls Thomas into his office on a rainy Monday morning. The older man's face betrays concern as he gestures for Thomas to take a seat. "I'll be direct, Thomas. Your student evaluations last semester were concerning." Thomas stiffens. "My courses are rigorous. Not everyone appreciates that." "It's not about rigor." Walsh slides a folder across the desk. "Students described your teaching as bitter, dismissive, and this is troubling, misogynistic." Thomas starts to protest, but Walsh raises a hand. "I'm assigning you to mentor Dr. Mercer this semester. Show her the departmental ropes. Collaborate on the upcoming philosophy symposium." "That's unnecessary," Thomas says coldly. "She seems quite capable of finding her way without my help." "It's not a request," Walsh replies firmly. You need this as much as she does, Thomas. Your work has become isolated, narrow. Resentful, Thomas attempts to sabotage the mentorship from the start. He forgets their first scheduled meeting, provides outdated syllabus templates, and responds to her questions with patronizing brevity. Elena, however, proves formidable, brilliant, emotionally intelligent, and unwilling to be intimidated. After a week of this treatment, she corners him in the faculty lounge. "Whatever personal issues you're projecting onto me, Professor Blackwood, they're interfering with our professional relationship," she says quietly, ensuring no colleagues can overhear. "I respect your work on Schopenhauer, but your behavior suggests you've absorbed more than just his philosophical ideas." Thomas is startled by her directness. "I don't know what you mean." "You're using Schopenhauer as a shield," she tells him, her dark eyes holding his gaze steadily. "Not as a lens. That's the difference between scholarship and self-justification." The truth of her words leaves him momentarily speechless, and in that silence, something shifts between them. Thomas stands before his Philosophy of Pessimism seminar, 20 eager graduate students watching as he methodically outlines Schopenhauer's view on women. The words flow easily after years of repetition. Schopenhauer contends that women are inherently focused on the species rather than the individual, lacking the capacity for objective appreciation of art, and deficient in the sense of justice, he explains, his chalk tapping against the blackboard for emphasis. He sees this as biological determinism rather than cultural conditioning. A hand rises in the back row. Maya Johnson, a bright second-year student whose incisive questions Thomas has come to dread. "Yes, Ms. Johnson?" he acknowledges reluctantly. "Professor Blackwood," Maya begins, her voice calm but resolute. "Couldn't these views simply reflect Schopenhauer's own failed relationships rather than universal truth? His mother rejected him, he never married, and historical accounts suggest his interactions with women were troubled at best. Isn't it possible his philosophy on this topic was shaped by personal bias rather than objective observation?" The classroom falls silent. Several students shift uncomfortably, while others lean forward, awaiting his response. Thomas feels heat rising to his face. "That's a rather simplistic psychoanalytic reduction, Ms. Johnson. Philosophy seeks universal truths beyond individual experience. Schopenhauer's personal life is irrelevant to the validity of his arguments." "But isn't all philosophy ultimately personal?" Maya persists. Even Schopenhauer himself claimed that philosophy begins with wonder about one's own existence. "That's enough," Thomas cuts her off sharply. "We're not here to psychoanalyze philosophers based on contemporary sensibilities." Next topic. The remainder of the class is tense. When the students file out, Thomas notices Elena standing in the hallway, having apparently overheard the exchange. "Interesting class," she comments neutrally. Thomas brushes past her without responding. Later, alone in his office with the door firmly closed, he finds himself unable to concentrate, Maya's question echoing in his mind. That night, he dreams of being put on trial, with Claire as prosecutor and Schopenhauer as judge, while all the women from his life sit in silent judgment in the jury box. The university's special collections librarian, Dr. Abigail Chen, contacts Thomas about a recent acquisition that might interest him, a collection of papers from a German estate sale, including items related to Schopenhauer. In the climate-controlled archives room, Thomas carefully examines the fragile documents. Among them, he discovers something unexpected, a series of personal letters between Schopenhauer and a woman named Isabella Weissmann, spanning nearly 15 years. The correspondence reveals a complex relationship that contradicts the philosopher's published views. In these private exchanges, Schopenhauer shows vulnerability, intellectual respect, and even seeks Isabella's opinions on his work. In one letter dated 1854, he writes, Your critique of my chapter on aesthetics has merit. I find myself reconsidering certain positions in light of your observations. Thomas reads until Dr. Chen politely informs him the archive is closing. He leaves disoriented, the foundations of his academic identity subtly shaken. That night, he pulls his own copy of Parerga and Paralipomena from the shelf, finding the misogynistic passages he's cited countless times. The contradiction between public philosophy and private correspondence disturbs him deeply. Meanwhile, his reluctant collaboration with Elena on the departmental symposium continues. During a planning session in the university cafe, she presents ideas that Thomas initially wants to dismiss, but finds himself unable to fault logically. "You're suggesting we pair Schopenhauer with de Beauvoir?" he asks incredulously. "Philosophical opposition creates intellectual friction," Elena replies. "Isn't that what generates the most interesting discussions?" As they work, Thomas gradually acknowledges her intellectual prowess, though he keeps this realization to himself. 3 weeks into their collaboration, Elena surprises Thomas with an unexpected invitation. "I'm hosting a dinner at my home this Saturday. Colleagues, friends, good food. You should come." Thomas automatically begins forming an excuse, but something stops him. Perhaps it's curiosity about the woman who so confidently challenged him. Or maybe it's simple loneliness. "What time?" he hears himself asking. Elena's home is a converted warehouse loft in the city's arts district, open spaces filled with books, plants, and eclectic art. Thomas arrives precisely on time, wine bottle in hand, to find a diverse gathering already in progress. Elena introduces him to her circle: Sophia, a neuroscientist; Marcus, a jazz musician; Layla, a human rights attorney; David, a literature professor from the university. For the first time in years, Thomas engages in conversation without hiding behind academic jargon or philosophical abstractions. During dinner, seated beside an elderly woman with bright eyes and a heavy accent, Thomas finds himself unexpectedly at ease. "You must be Ruth," he says, recalling Elena mentioning her grandmother. Ruth nods, studying him with perceptive eyes. "And you are the Schopenhauer expert my granddaughter speaks of." "She's mentioned me?" Thomas asks, surprised. "She says you are brilliant but trapped," Ruth replies matter-of-factly. "I understand something about traps." Over dessert, Ruth shares her story: a Holocaust survivor who lost her entire family, rebuilt her life in America, raised a daughter alone after her husband's early death, and now watches her granddaughter thrive. "To survive," she tells Thomas as the evening winds down, "I had to believe in humanity despite evidence to the contrary. This is the hardest philosophy, but the only one worth practicing." Her words stay with him long after he returns home, challenging his pessimism in ways pure academic argument never could. On a gusty October afternoon, Thomas receives a text message he's been dreading. Claire wants to collect her remaining belongings from their shared storage unit. They agree to meet Sunday morning. When he arrives, Claire is already there, sorting through boxes. 3 years of marriage reduced to cardboard containers labeled kitchen and books. She looks well, her hair shorter, her posture more confident. "You look good," he offers awkwardly. "Thanks. Life's been good." Her smile is genuine but reserved. "I'm teaching at Berkeley now." California suits you then. The small talk quickly exhausts itself, leaving uncomfortable silence as they work. When Thomas accidentally knocks over a box of photographs, their wedding album spills out. They both stare at it. "I never understood what happened to us," Thomas finally says. Claire looks at him directly. "You never saw me, Thomas. You saw some idealized version at first, then later, just a collection of flaws to be catalogued and analyzed. But never me." "That's not fair," he protests. "Isn't it? You spent our marriage hiding in books written by dead men who never figured out how to love actual women either." The truth of her words stings. Thomas wants to retreat into intellectual defense, but finds he lacks the energy for it. "I didn't know how to be different," he admits quietly. Claire's expression softens slightly. "I know. That's why I had to leave." As they finish dividing their shared past, Claire pauses at the door of the storage unit. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Thomas." But it's not in Schopenhauer's essays. After she drives away, Thomas sits alone among the remaining boxes, confronting the emptiness he's been avoiding through intellectual abstraction. The confrontation with Claire triggers something in Thomas. The following days pass in a haze of insomnia and restless energy. He cancels classes for the first time in his career, claiming illness. In truth, he can't bear to recite philosophical doctrines that suddenly feel hollow. Late one night, sleepless and agitated, he emails the Special Collections librarian requesting access to more of the Schopenhauer-Isabella correspondence. Dr. Chen replies that the university has only the letters he's already seen, but mentions that the main collection resides in a small museum in Frankfurt. Almost without conscious decision, Thomas finds himself booking a flight to Germany. He requests emergency personal leave from the department, citing a research opportunity. The night before his departure, he hesitates, then sends Elena a brief email explaining his absence and apologizing for leaving their symposium planning unfinished. Her reply comes quickly. "Some questions can only be answered through pilgrimage. Safe travels. The symposium will wait." The flight gives Thomas too much time to question his impulsive decision. What does he expect to find? What is he running from? As the plane descends into Frankfurt, he realizes this is the first truly spontaneous action he's taken in years. The small Schopenhauer archive is housed in a restored 19th century building on a quiet street. The curator, Dr. Müller, is initially suspicious of the American professor's sudden interest, but warms when Thomas shares his discovery of the letters and his questions about the relationship. "Ah, Isabella Weismann," Dr. Müller nods. "A fascinating woman, physician, writer, and one of the few female intellectuals Schopenhauer seems to have respected. Their correspondence was extensive." Over the next 3 days, Thomas immerses himself in the archives, tracing the evolution of a relationship that contradicts everything he's taught about Schopenhauer's view of women. In one letter, the philosopher even acknowledges, "Perhaps my published views require reconsideration in light of our discourse." In his hotel room each night, Thomas finds himself questioning not just his understanding of Schopenhauer, but the foundations of his own worldview. He emails Elena fragments of his discoveries, surprised by how much he values her perspective. While researching in the Frankfurt archives, Thomas uncovers mentions of Isabella's journals, reportedly preserved by her family. With Dr. Müller's help, he tracks down her great-great-granddaughter, Ingrid Weissmann, who teaches linguistics at Heidelberg University. His meeting with Ingrid in a Heidelberg cafe reveals another layer to the story. Isabella's journals, written in elegant, precise German, present a woman of extraordinary intellect and emotional insight. In one entry from 1852, she writes, "S. presents such certainty in his published works, yet in our conversations admits to doubts. His public misogyny seems more performance than conviction, a shield against vulnerability. In this, he is no different from other men who fear what they cannot control, the honest emotion of a woman who sees them clearly." Isabella, it emerges, challenged Schopenhauer while respecting his intellect. Their relationship, though never romantic, evolved into one of rare intellectual equality. Most surprisingly, Isabella's journals reveal that in his final years, Schopenhauer privately expressed regret for the harshness of his published views on women. "Why did he never publicly recant?" Thomas asks Ingrid as they walk along the Philosopher's Way, overlooking the old city. "Would you?" she counters. "Would you publicly reject the ideas that made your reputation, that became your identity?" The question follows Thomas back to his hotel room. where he sits awake until dawn, confronting uncomfortable parallels between himself and the philosopher he's devoted his career to studying. Thomas returns to campus changed in subtle ways that colleagues notice but cannot name. He resumes his classes but finds himself unable to teach Schopenhauer's views on women with the same conviction. Instead, he introduces the newly discovered correspondence, presenting philosophy as a living, evolving discourse rather than immutable doctrine. In his graduate seminar, Maya Johnson watches this transformation with cautious interest. After class, she approaches his desk. "Professor Blackwood, your approach seems different since you returned from Germany." Thomas considers this. "Perhaps I'm finally learning to use philosophy as a lens rather than a shield," he says, echoing Elena's words. The symposium planning with Elena resumes, their collaboration now marked by genuine intellectual exchange rather than antagonism. During one session in his office, Thomas impulsively shares Isabella's journal entries. "She saw through him," Elena remarks after reading them. "The question is whether he ever truly saw her." "I think he did," Thomas replies. "Too late to change his published work, but not too late to change himself." Elena studies him thoughtfully. "And you, Thomas? What are you seeing now that you couldn't before?" The question hangs between them, intimate and challenging. Before he can answer, Elena's phone rings. A family emergency requiring her immediate attention. As she leaves, Thomas realizes how much he's come to value their conversations, how much he anticipates their meetings. The realization unsettles him. Thomas begins a practice of daily walks through the university arboretum, something he'd previously dismissed as wasted time. During these walks, he observes the changing autumn landscape and finds himself noticing details he'd overlooked for years. The particular quality of light through red maple leaves, conversations between students on benches, the complex social rituals of campus life. One afternoon, he encounters Ruth feeding ducks by the pond. She invites him to sit, and they share comfortable silence before she speaks. "My granddaughter says you found something important in Germany." "I found that a philosopher I've studied. My entire career may have been wrong about fundamental aspects of human nature," Thomas admits. "Or at least that he knew he was wrong and chose not to correct himself publicly." Ruth nods. "Men often mistake their wounds for wisdom." "What do you mean?" "When we are hurt, we create theories to protect ourselves from being hurt again," she explains. "Sometimes these theories become prisons." Thomas considers this. "How do you avoid that trap?" "You don't," Ruth says simply. "You recognize it. You understand that fear is natural but not always truthful. And then you choose to live despite the fear." Their conversation is interrupted when Elena appears on the path, surprised to find her grandmother with Thomas. The three walk together to the campus cafe, and Thomas observes the easy affection between the women, the way they communicate in half-sentences and shared glances. For the first time, he feels a pang of genuine regret for what his marriage might have been had he been capable of such openness with Claire. Spring arrives, bringing green to campus and a sense of renewal. Thomas stands before his Philosophy of Pessimism seminar, now restructured as Philosophical Pessimism and its Critiques. The classroom is filled beyond capacity, students sitting on windowsills and the floor. Schopenhauer wrote that life swings like a pendulum backward and forward between pain and boredom. Thomas begins, "For years I presented this as profound truth. Today, I'd like us to consider it as one possibility among many, a perspective shaped by personal experience rather than universal wisdom." As the lecture continues, Thomas weaves together Schopenhauer's published works, the Isabella correspondence, and contemporary critiques. He no longer presents philosophy as abstract doctrine, but as an ongoing conversation about how to live meaningfully in an uncertain world. Maya Johnson, now working on a dissertation under his supervision, watches with approval. After class, she lingers to speak with him. "You've changed, Professor. Your lectures feel alive now." Thomas smiles slightly. "Perhaps I'm finally learning what philosophy is actually for." That evening, as spring rain taps against his office window, Thomas receives an email from Claire, a professional update, collegial but warm. Her final line reads, "I heard about your work with the Schopenhauer-Isabella correspondence. It seems you found something valuable in Germany." As he contemplates his reply, Elena appears in his doorway, raindrops glistening in her dark hair. "Dinner?" she asks simply. Thomas closes his laptop and stands. For the first time in years, philosophy can wait. "Yes," he says, reaching for his coat. "I'd like that." As they walk across campus under a shared umbrella, Thomas realizes that his true philosophical education is only beginning, not in ancient texts or academic debates, but in the messy, beautiful reality of genuine human connection. The rain continues to fall, but for once, Thomas doesn't mind getting a little wet.